Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms speaks out against the Manitoba lockdowns, saying they infringe on people's charter rights. An Alberta UCP MLA speaks out against talk of Alberta potentially getting a new provincial sales tax. And we hear about a sanctuary which is saving the lives of a hybrid animal known as a wolf dog.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. RCMPs say they fined a man at a Manitoba church for allegedly violating the province's public health orders on COVID-19. Police say their officers were stationed outside of the Church of God Restoration in Steinbach yesterday to block the entranceway and remind would-be churchgoers of public health rules.
By laying fines upon us, handing out tickets. Mr. Officers, are you all realizing that you are doing that to God? Let that sink in for a minute.
Police say most people heeded the warning except for one man who entered the church property and was fined nearly $1,300. The province ordered churches to close earlier this month to deal with a surge of COVID-19 cases, saying people could only attend services virtually. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is saying that the current Manitoba lockdowns are violating people's fundamental charter rights. The government has locked down the province to varying degrees since March. John CARPAY is the group's president. And John, you say there are a number of ways people's rights are being infringed upon?
Religious freedom is being trampled into the ground in Manitoba. The government has not only prohibited church services, we know of one church had a $5,000 fine, but they're even preventing drive-in church services where people would just sit in their cars. I guess the Manitoba government believes that COVID can jump through metal and glass from one car and then move through the air and then penetrate the metal and glass from another car. There's just no science behind this. And the same goes for pretending that COVID is not in the produce section of the store, but it is in the toy section. There's no science behind this, and it's a very significant violation of our rights and freedoms as Canadians.
Are you planning on taking legal action against the government of Manitoba?
Absolutely. We are, as we speak, we are preparing court actions for several provinces, including Manitoba. And unless the government lifts these charter violations immediately or in the next few days, they'll have to answer in court.
That was John CARPAY, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me from Calgary. Police in Calgary say they're investigating participants that held weekend rallies. Hundreds of people gathered outside of Calgary City Hall on Saturday without masks or physical distancing to protest measures intended to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. Police say they make every effort to play their part in enforcement, but say their primary objective is to ask for voluntary compliance and to educate the public on the restrictions. The state of public health emergency continues in Alberta. The province announced 1,733 new cases of COVID-19 today, while completing around 20,500 new tests. The provincial positivity rate is around 8.4%. There are 16,454 active cases of the virus. The government says 453 people are in hospital, including 96 in the ICU. There were also 8 new deaths over the past 24 hours. As for our schools, there are now active alerts or outbreaks at 376 schools, including 3 new cases at Wilson Middle School in Lethbridge. Alberta Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dean Hinshaw, says 16% of schools in Alberta have at least one case of the novel coronavirus.
Currently, these schools have a combined total of 1,405 active cases. This number includes 203 schools with outbreaks, including 88 currently on the watch list. With students in grades 7 to 12 moving to online learning today, we can expect to see a reduction in the number of cases, outbreaks, and alerts attributed to schools in the coming days.
Many Albertans are concerned that to help our province get back to black and balance the budget, the government may actually be considering a provincial sales tax. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation has already spoken out against the potential tax, saying Finance Minister Travis Taves has not completely shut the door on the idea. Someone else who's dead set against another tax on Albertans is Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes, and he joins me now from the side of the road in Taber. Drew, why not bring in a PST if it helps the government balance the books? I mean, after all, we're the only province in Canada that doesn't have one.
Simply enough, the UCP government ran on doing something about the high cost of government in Alberta. It's absolutely clear that Albertans, taxpayers, spend the most per capita on the cost of government services, and we don't always get the results. That's the first reason. The second reason, of course, is the best way for Albertans to share in the oil and gas, the Alberta advantage, is to keep every Albertan the opportunity to have more choice, more freedom, and more direction with how they spend their money.
According to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, the potential new tax would cost each Albertan about $1,000 a year. What's the danger of bringing forth a proposed 5% PST at this time?
Let's start with the fact that, income tax was a temporary measure after World War I, and now income tax rates, federal and provincial combined, are 50 points. Secondly, there's some things to look at in terms of how high cost our government spending is already. And then thirdly, there's just a situation where so many Albertans have stopped working, moved their capital and their investment out of Alberta, out of Canada. I believe that more taxation, if the UCP government doesn't do something about the high cost of government, we're going to have even more job creators and people that invest money pull their money out of Alberta, and that will be harmful for all families and all communities.
That was Cypress Medicine Hat MLA Drew Barnes. Lethbridge police are investigating after a small truck was driven through the front window of Honker's Pub and Eatery in North Lethbridge early Sunday morning. Police say the incident occurred around 6 a.m. with the culprits taking the ATM during the smash and grab. A GoFundMe has been set up in support of Honker's Pub, and so far around $10,000 has been raised. Now, if you can help police with their investigation, call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. Lethbridge has once again proved to be a very giving community. This past weekend's charity check stop, hosted by Lethbridge Police Services, raised nearly $8,500. Over 1,300 toys and goods were donated to the Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree campaign. There were also close to £2,400 worth of food donated to the food bank. LPS says the community really pulled through for people who will need it the most this Christmas.
The generosity of everybody was just overwhelming. Those who could give did, and they did tremendously. Everybody was bringing carloads of stuff, and it wasn't just a toy. It was bags of toys and bags of food and the cash donations, and everybody who came, it was just, like I said, incredible, the amount of generosity everybody was showing this year. And like you said, I think everybody knows that there's a lot of people who are in a tough situation, and so those who are able to give, they did, and they did with all their hearts.
The event was hosted in drive-through fashion at the NMAC Centre, and LPS said they'll make this an annual event. Victim Services Unit in Lethbridge needs help reaching their fundraising goal. The Facility Dog Program supports hundreds of kids each and every year and is solely funded by fundraising initiatives and donations. Their 2021 calendars are now out, featuring some of the heroic puppies.
It's so hard to even pin down in a couple sentences how much we rely on these animals to help support our victims and how good of a job that they do doing it. They're both ADI certified dogs, so Assistance Dogs International certified. So it's no different than being licensed as a doctor or a social worker, right? So we have a lot of pride that we take in these animals because of all of the training and everything that they've gone through. It really is quite amazing to see how they can ground someone and just absolutely make you love them in a second.
The new calendar of support of victim services is $20. The Interfaith Food Bank has started a new initiative called the Gift of Giving. Now, the goal of the program is to provide a donation to the food bank in the name of a family member or friend. Interfaith will then present a letter to the giver with the name of a family member or friend showing that the donation has been made, which they can then mail out. Hobgoblin Holdings in Lethbridge made the first donation of the season with a $1,000 donation.
Hobgoblin Holdings has stepped up again this year. They're usually the first of the season, and they do it in honor of their tenants. So it's a great inspiration to other businesses and community members of how they can give something on behalf of someone that is going to support a local family in need. People tend to think of food banks between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and so what we bring in at this time of year is going to determine the level of support we're able to offer in 2021. So we really encourage community members to give while the spirit of giving is fresh on their minds.
McIntyre says that Interfaith doesn't have a goal in mind for the gift of giving, but as part of the Christmas Hope campaign, they're looking to raise around $250,000 collectively. It is a winter wonderland at Northbridge Senior Centre, and the centre is gearing up for Christmas with lots of trees, lights, and decorations. Now this year, The event had to be changed to a virtual display due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As Micah Quinn explains, almost all of the trees will be donated back to local food banks this year.
Showcasing the Winter Wonderland on Facebook Live was a bit of a different experience for program coordinator Ashley KERN.
That way it was about 20 minutes of just walking through the hallway really slowly to kind of show everyone from home what it looks like instead of coming down here. And we had a really great response of over 50 views right when we were doing it live.
There's just under 40 trees decorated at the Nordbridge Senior Center, and 30 trees were donated.
Of course, this time of the year, it's really important to have, helping out nonprofits and those that are less fortunate. So of course, most of the trees will be donated back to the Interfaith Food Bank that we've had donated to us. And then all of the non-perishable food items will go back to the Interfaith Food Bank as well.
KERN says that there were a few favorite decorations.
I would say they liked the blow-up Grinch and the Santa Claus. And then a few of our trees, they were commenting on how beautiful they all were.
The Winter Wonderland will be up until December 24th, and if anyone wants to see the exhibit, they have to book a reservation in the dining room. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
It's the time of year when many people begin their Christmas baking, and I'm really looking forward to it once again. Loris Alexander spoke with a Lethbridge baker to bring some sweet inspiration needed during these very dark times.
Today we are making shortbread cookies, which are perfect for the Christmas season.
Ingredients needed for this easy-to-do recipe include eggs, butter, flour, and vanilla.
So we're just gonna roll it out, and then we're just gonna punch out in our lovely Christmas shapes. So we're gonna do some Christmas trees. So we're gonna pan these up, and they go in the oven for 11 minutes at 375, and then we'll let them cool, and then we can start decorating.
For those looking to skip a few steps, Boots My Bakery has do-it-yourself decorating kits.
With our DIY decorating kits, you get 6 cookies, some candy, and some icing bags. It's important to just massage the icing bags first, so then the ingredients get mixed up again.
And let the decorating begin.
So there we go. Tuck those in, and there you have it, an ugly Christmas sweater.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Opposition leaders have outlined what they would like to see in the fall economic statement in a series of Parliament-held news conferences. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole says he wants to see more support for business owners who are still struggling during the COVID-19 pandemic. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is pushing for enhanced childcare, universal pharmacare, and an end to for-profit long-term care homes. Green leader Annamie Paul says the government should not end spending and underinvest in protecting people during the pandemic. The Saskatchewan legislature resumed sitting today. Now, members wore masks, and there were around $12,000 worth of new plexiglass shields installed on desks, which have been spaced apart. The province plans to use the 2-week sitting to introduce new legislation that fulfills promises Premier Scott Moe made during last month's election campaign. Health officials in Saskatchewan are warning of more potential COVID-19 exposures at curling rinks. The latest warning centers around a couple of rinks in Regina, the Highland Curling Club from November 13th to the 23rd, and the Caledonian Curling Club from November 16th through the 24th. The Saskatchewan Health Authority also posted notices over the weekend of exposure risks at recreation centres in Christopher Lake and Shellbrook. Last week, the Saskatchewan government ordered the suspension of all team sports across amateur and recreational leagues, including curling, hockey, and dance. Moderna says it will ask U.S. and European regulators to allow emergency use of its COVID-19 vaccine as new study results confirm the shots offer strong protection.
The vaccine is expected to be highly effective at preventing symptomatic disease and very effective at preventing severe outcomes from the disease. We believe these data are robust and should be clearly sufficient to enable the emergency use authorization in the US, and we hope global marketing authorizations as well in other jurisdictions. On a personal level, when we saw the first interim results, I think we were all really relieved and enthusiastic. I can tell you when I saw the final results last night, they came in a little bit earlier than we had planned for. I allowed myself to cry for the first time.
An animal sanctuary west of Calgary is providing a permanent home for wolf dogs, which is a cross between a wolf and a dog. The Amnuska Wolf Dog Sanctuary is home to 37 of the animals, many of which would have been euthanized if it didn't exist.
The owner of the sanctuary, her name's Georgina. When she was about 19 years old, she got her very first wolf dog, which she got as a pet thinking it was going to be really awesome, really cool, like a lot of people do. And Kuna is the wolf dog. She's still here today. And basically she was the inspiration for Georgina starting this place up because she learned very quickly that a high content wolf dog with a lot of wolf and a very small amount of dog is just not suitable to be a regular pet. She just started to learn that there's so many people out there that want to get a wolf dog thinking it's really cool and then just don't understand that they are really challenging. So she wanted to create a place to not only educate people about wolf dogs, but to also house the ones that people end up giving up and they don't have any other places to go.
Some beautiful looking dogs. We had a lot of cloud cover today, but not too bad temperature wise, and the warming trend will continue this week. Full weather details are on deck. Just when you think we've been receiving lots of mild temperatures across southwestern Alberta, comes word we may hit double-digit temperatures later this week. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a look at the long-range weather forecast. Jeanette, there's talk of us possibly hitting 13 to 15 by the weekend?
Yeah, Hal, that's right. But not only double digits, we could actually be seeing temperatures up into the teens by a Saturday. Looking into tonight, low of -6, we could see a 70 kilometer per hour wind. Into tomorrow, wind not as bad, only down to 15K. We can live with that, can't we? 1 degree is the high tomorrow. Lots of sunshine as well. Sunny throughout the rest of the week. I am so happy to report that. 5 degrees the high on Wednesday, 10 the high for Thursday, 8 for Friday. And then there we see those teen temperatures for the weekend. Saturday, 15 degrees and a lovely 13 for a Sunday. Even today wasn't so bad. We actually were close to the hot spot in Alberta, which was Cardston, which was just a little bit warmer than us. So the average high for this time of year, 1, we've been definitely seeing temperatures higher than that. -10, the average low. 17 was our high in 1969, and the chilliest day on record was in 1975. It was -28. 8:06 was the sunrise this morning, and our Monday sunset, 4:35 p.m. for those of us going home on the west side with the sun in our eyes. Not so fun this time of year. The west coast, not too bad. Mix of sun and cloud in both Vancouver and Victoria. They could actually see some fog dissipating in the morning near noon. 7 degrees in Vancouver, 8 in Victoria, 0 in Edmonton, and -2 in Calgary with lots of sunshine. Now those temperatures are actually on the lower end compared to what they're going to be seeing for the rest of the week. They're going to be seeing much nicer temperatures, as are we. Light snow expected in Saskatchewan tomorrow. Saskatoon's high -1 and 0 degrees. Both of those cities could see wind gusts up to 60 km per hour. Sunshine in Winnipeg with a high of -1. Now, as we get over here to Toronto, Ottawa area, Toronto could see some showers and possibly some flurries tomorrow. High of 2 degrees, 7 degrees is the high in Ottawa. They could see showers or drizzle. Drizzle and showers also expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of 14. As we get over further east here, we're seeing a little bit heavier rains. Fredericton, 14 degrees. They could see heavy rain there, up to 70 millimeters in certain areas with the heaviest rainfall. Halifax, high of 15. They could see showers or drizzle. Showers or drizzle also expected in Charlottetown tomorrow with a high of 13 degrees. 5 degrees is the expected high for St. John's with sunny skies. They could see a bit of clouds rolling in later on in the day. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Canada's Telecom Ombudsman says complaints about wireless, internet and TV services were down 19% this year over last. But the Commission for Complaints says complaints about the quality of home internet were actually up between March and July over the same period last year. That coincided with the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced millions of Canadians to rely on telecom services to work, study and socialize. Wireless services accounted for 44% of all complaints ending July 31st, followed by internet services at 27% and TV services at 14%. Shares of Nikola plunged 26% after General Motors announced it will not be taking a stake in the electric vehicle company. Nikola released updated terms for a supply agreement related to GM's fuel cell system, replacing an agreement signed last September. The deal would have given GM an 11% stake in Nikola in exchange for engineering and building Nikola's Badger hydrogen fuel cell and electric pickup truck. Nikola says it will scuttle the vehicle and offer deposit refunds to customers who wanted first dibs on their truck. One of Canada's most prized artificial intelligence companies is being put into the hands of Americans. Montreal's Element AI says it accepted a takeover offer from California-based ServiceNow. The firm that creates AI solutions for large companies did not disclose financial terms of the deal, which is expected to close next year. ServiceNow says the acquisition will help it create a Canadian hub for consumer-focused innovation. Black Friday online sales hit a new record in the United States this year as pandemic-weary Americans fill their virtual carts instead of real ones. According to Adobe Analytics, which tracks online shopping, consumers spent close to $9 billion on U.S. retail websites on Black Friday. That was a 22% increase over the previous record of $7.4 billion last year. Meanwhile, in-person traffic dropped 52%. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 206 points on the day to finish at 17,190. The Dow was down 271 to 29,638. The S&P 500 was down 16 points to 3621, and the Nasdaq was down 7 points to finish at 12,198. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 47 cents to 45.06 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to 293 US. Gold was up 9 cents to 1777.04 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 22.64 US an ounce. Wheat is at $272 per metric ton, barley's at $274, canola's at $578, and corn is at $293 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 38 cents to $112.88, feeder cattle were up $1.23 to $141.05, and lean hogs were up $1.70 to $67.58. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 76.90 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge has once again proved to be a giving community. This past weekend's charity check stop hosted by Lethbridge Police Services raised nearly $8,500. Over 1,300 toys and goods were donated to the Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree campaign. Also, close to 2,400 pounds worth of food were donated to the food bank. Coming up, Jeanette Roche interviews David RIFFEL, founder of Mentoring Warriors, who explains why we should be alarmed at how many men under the age of 35 are taking their own lives. That interview is coming up shortly. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Christmas at Casa Holiday Market is going online this year from now until December 1st at christmasatcasa.ca. Avoid the crowds and find one-of-a-kind art pieces and fine crafts, handmade by over 40 vendors. Depending on the vendor, there are various options for local drop-off, shipping, and safe curbside pickup. Visit christmasatcasa.ca today. Shop of Wonders is looking for volunteers beginning in December to help bring some Christmas cheer to families who need a special something this year. This is a My City Care initiative through My Victory Church in Lethbridge, which helps to give people hope and a hand up. Volunteers will wrap gifts, entertain kids, and assist with other tasks. To learn more about this opportunity, call Carol at 403-942-1378 or email carol@myvictory.ca. Get to know your city and take part in the Lethbridge Scavenger Hunt. Download the Let's Roam Scavenger Hunt app, lace up your walking shoes, and head out with family to discover the best landmarks in Lethbridge. Put your navigation skills to the test while enjoying the journey at your own pace. No reservations, no tour guides, and fun for all ages. Visit letsroam.com/scavenger hunt. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Did you know that young men between the ages of 18 and 30 are vulnerable to premature death? Unintentional injury, suicide, and homicide are the leading causes of death for young men. According to our next guest, culture is sending mixed messages about what masculinity is all about, as many young men are picking up their cues from the media. David RIFFEL is the founder and executive director of Mentoring Warriors, an organization committed to equipping men to mentor other young men. He's also the author of Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old. He joins us now via Skype from Wichita, Kansas. David, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be online with you.
Now, David, you paint a very bleak picture here that young men seem to be adrift in our culture. What's going on?
Well, I think deep down, I think one of the issues that's happening with young men is we can say it's a lack of purpose, lack of direction. I think when I think about this question, um, the realization is that in some respects, if you look at history and you look even into biblical times, there's always been this issue of men pouring into the next generation. And it seems like in our culture now, we've become very siloed. I mean, even my generation, we're always thinking only about ourselves. And as a result of that, that younger generation doesn't have an older, mature people speaking into them. So they're basically kind of adrift, trying to figure out ways to ask for help. And I know some of the struggles that some of the men, when they lose that hope, they tend to move towards suicide. In a couple of cases, and in my situation in mentoring, I've seen that happen where, I've been working with a young man and life kind of falls apart for him. He struggles in areas like pornography and things. And the next thing you know, I'm getting a text saying, "Hey, can you keep a secret?" And I'm like, "Well, it depends on what the secret is." And he says, "I have a gun." Well, when things like that happen, you can't keep those things a secret. And thankfully, in that situation, we're able to intervene and get him some help that he needs. But I think a lot of times it's that lack of, and I'm saying this is one factor in it, but that lack of older men speaking into the lives of younger guys. That would be one of the reasons why I think it's happening.
Yeah, that's actually that's staggering. Now, the suicide rate for young men is 3.5 times higher than it is for young women. So, and you kind of explained a little bit of what you made of this, but what do you make of this?
Well, in terms of like, what do you do? Well, it's obviously the idea, I believe, that it's that investing in young men to give them some direction and some purpose, not telling them what to do, but, in a real sense, helping them find out what is I call it their unique kingdom voice. How's God wired them? How are they made? And generally, what I find with young guys is there's kind of like 6 basic areas that we tend to want to talk through. 18 to 30, we call that the warrior stage of life because they're in that stage where they're moving out of adolescence. Some of them are leaving home to go to university. Maybe they're getting married, but there's so many choices that are being made in that age and those 10, 12 years. And a lot of those kind of topics we go through when we mentor. And so what I did in my book is I teamed with Wichita State University to do some qualitative research on, well, what does it take to have a healthy mentoring relationship with guys in that age range? And so with their research and with some of my own experiences in writing, I've written about 6 basic areas that guys deal with, and then how do you walk them through those areas of life?
So, what are the biggest challenges young men say that they're dealing with?
Well, if I kind of just talk through those things, first one would be like self-management. Some guys, it's just getting up on time. It's learning how to have self-control and in those areas, or it's financial management. Sometimes a guy will call me up and say, "Hey, Mr. Riffel, could you loan me about $100?" Well, it depends on what we're doing this $100 for, kind of thing. So self-management is a real issue of learning what's real priorities. And often it's not what their priorities were when they were in their adolescence. It needs to shift. Another area that we talk about a lot is life skills. And I always joke and say, we can go to YouTube to figure out how to fix something, but there's something to be said about having somebody who is experienced in whether it's fixing the car or changing out a toilet or even learning how to shoot a gun or whatever it is, to have somebody older to come alongside you to really kind of show you something that, to be honest, you just can't learn online necessarily. So life skills. A third one's a really big one. Education and career. What in the world am I going to be when I grow up? I'll give you an example of one young guy. He went into mechanical engineering because, well, that's what his dad did. And he discovered pretty quickly he hated math. It just was not his deal. And so through conversations, many conversations with me, a lot of prayer, a lot of discussions with his career counselors at the university, he switched over to graphic design and figured out that not only does he enjoy that so much better, but he realizes that's exactly how God's wired him. In fact, is our Mentoring Warriors logo he developed, you know? So education and career, and there's two kind of paths in that. One is the professional. Now, I'm actually an architect. My son is in medical school. So you go to professional, you learn a track and you do that. But there's others that don't. They go to maybe have more of a liberal arts degree, and that's perfectly fine. It's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times in those searches, there's a lot of different careers that a young man has to go through to figure out exactly who they are. So we talk a lot about education and career. Another one, the fourth one we talk about is faith. And if a young man has grown up in a church, a lot of times he goes out on his own, and typically warriors are the least likely population to attend church or to be involved in any kind of faith. Not always, but that tends to be it. They tend to go off, and they really have to wrestle with the question, is this my parents' faith? Is it my faith? What do I really believe? And so a lot of times there's wrestling that goes through that. And I've seen some young men that will, from a head perspective, acknowledge who Christ is, but they're walking out. I said they're orbiting around Jesus, but they're way out there in Pluto somewhere, you know. But we walk through issues of faith to help them figure out what do they really believe. And then a couple more that we always are dealing with is relationships. You know, I like to say it this way. God's wired men for relationships. And it says all the way back in the book of Genesis that a man's going to leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. And a lot of times that movement out of mom and dad's house is whether it's a university or getting a career or a job and an apartment, but it's the idea of moving towards relationships. One of the young guys that I mentor just got engaged on Sunday. And, you know, he's 20 years old, but we've had a lot of conversations about what relationships look like. So learning how young men can start thinking like a husband, how to date and pursue a woman. The other part of relationships in that area too is the issue of separating or letting go from mom and dad, and just having healthy relationships in that area. And then the sixth one, or the last one, is what we call it manhood identity. What does it mean to be a man? Does it mean I wear certain clothes and drive a truck? Or what does it mean? There's so many different identities of what a man is like. But when you look at it, it really comes down to character. And it really comes down to what does God say that a man ought to be? A man that would be one who wants to be defined by who God says a man ought to be in terms of character and how he treats people. And then related to that a lot is our conversations about purity. And obviously we know that statistically speaking, a lot of young men in that age, a vast majority struggle in areas of purity and pornography. And so we do some things with Mentoring Warriors to help guys work through those issues, to help them with accountability. So when you're asking kind of the questions about men needing direction in that area, typically it's going to be in those roughly 6 areas that more or less they're going to need help and they need some guidance.
Mm-hmm. So David, you mentioned you're an architect by trade. So how did a professional architect get involved with mentoring young men like this?
Yeah, I always tease I'm an architect by day and I mentor by night, but reality is the story kind of starts maybe roughly about 10 years ago. Our son was about 14 at the time. I think he was in grade 9. And the church we were attending, the way they did their youth, all the guys would be in a small group together and the gals separately by gender. And so a lot of times they would come over to our house, play ball, and then go downstairs and, you know, have a Bible study. And there was a couple new young guys, and our church had this opportunity an adult could sign up to be a prayer warrior for a young man. So I thought, well, there's 2 new boys in the youth group and I'll just get to know them. So I did that. And over time we could swap texts for praying, and maybe we'd go fishing or do hangout or do something. And as they grew up, I realized that they started confiding in me on struggles that they had, whether it's about girls or purity or parents or just any sort of things. And I realized that I had become kind of a safe place for them. So that began to make me realize I started getting kind of some of their friends wanting me to meet up with their buddies too on kind of similar issues. So about that time, roughly about 5 years ago, right after my daughter's wedding, I unexpectedly had quadruple heart bypass surgery. So all I can tell you is when a guy is in his 50s and you have heart surgery, it really kind of rocks your world. It's like, why am I here? So I really put me on this last 5 years has put me on kind of a search for God, why do you have me here? And I realized that there's a significant impact that can be done on young guys. So that's where I teamed with Wichita State and I ended up writing a book. And now it's formed into a ministry that we call Mentoring Warriors. And so here in the States, we have our 501c3 and we have a board of directors and things like that. And it's really been fun, exciting to see how God's impacting other people. So that's how I kind of got started into it.
That's awesome. So what happened to you as a young man, David, that had a profound impact on your life?
You know, I always say in my book, I was essentially mentorless. And it wasn't like I didn't have a dad or had people speak into my life, but there was probably more through my teens and my early 20s. There was probably a need that I see in hindsight. I could have benefited from having a mentor where some of my own insecurities, some of my own struggles that I felt like I was the only guy on the planet, facing those, that had I had a mentor, it probably would have helped me get a little more stabilized in some of those earlier years. And so I think through that own mentorless experiences in my own life, I think God really put on to me a heart for mentoring young guys. I just have an ache for them, just really want to see them become young men that really can kind of rise up into their manhood.
Yeah. So what are the qualifications of a good mentor and how does one become one?
Well, I always say, a mentor is imperfectly humble. You don't have to be perfect. I've had so many conversations with older guys like, well, I don't have my act together. And I'm like, the fact that you don't have your act together, but you're willing to allow God to kind of work and father you through those makes you greatly qualified to be a mentor. So not this arrogant, well, let me teach you how it's going to be, boy. It's not that kind of attitude at all, but it's his humility that says, you know what, hey, I'm a work in progress too. I understand. I was there when I was 25 or whatever age. Let me kind of identify with you. I want to hear what your story is, and I'm willing to walk with you. So I would think underlying everything, being humble is really good. I think from a biblical Christian perspective, I think understanding the gospel to the point where when Jesus says in the Great Commission, hey, we're going to go make disciples, mentoring is part of making disciples. And so that would be something really important, I think, is a good qualification. I know some people ask me, well, what do you do when you go mentor? Well, there's three things that I think help make effective mentoring. One of them is always, 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 in one form or another, when you get together with a young guy, spend some time in the Word. And that could be anything from a formal Bible study to just sharing some verses that you've memorized or working through just some stuff in your head in terms of what God has to say about certain things in life, but engage God's Word somehow in the conversation. A second thing, always, 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 is spend some time praying together. And, not just God bless my day, but God, are there some areas of my heart, or are there areas of my life that you can father me in? And just kind of spend some time doing it. It doesn't have to be a long time, but just that engaging back and forth in prayer. And then the third one, which is super important, go do something fun together. Go do something you like. And like I pick on shooting guns, or maybe it's going fishing or hiking or camping or whatever it is that the two of you like to do, just go have fun together. Because this is not just some program. This is about building a relationship, is really what it is. So those are some things that I think really help for make an effective mentoring.
That's awesome. And you know what, David? I wish I could spend more time talking to you, but it looks like we're about out of time. So David RIFFEL, author of Mentoring Warriors, coming alongside men 18 to 30 years old. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
COVID-19 has not only impacted our health, but also disrupted relationships and businesses. Our guest today believes that now is the time to see the workplace not just as a paycheck, but as a place to demonstrate truth and the reality of faith. But how do we do this when our world is so hostile right now to Christian values, or appeared hostility? David Gill is the author of 9 books, one of which we're featuring today called Workplace Discipleship 101, and he joins me now from Oakland, California via Skype. David, welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
Now, you start out by distinguishing between the workplace and the marketplace. What's the real difference here?
Well, what I'm really interested in is what does our faith, what does our confession that Jesus is Lord mean for our work? Okay, and a lot of things have been written about this. It's kind of a movement of the last 30 or 40 years. Some of the literature talks about marketplace ministry, and some of it talks about theology of work and that kind of thing. I prefer talking about workplace discipleship because marketplace puts the emphasis on the exchange, buying and selling, exchanging, trading, and that is important work. We want Jesus to be Lord of our market activities, but there are a lot of things in the workplace that are, for example, raising children. That's not a matter of the marketplace. It's a matter of us exerting ourselves to try to deliver products and services that glorify God. So I view everybody works. Some of them work in marketing. A lot of times we hope we get paid for our work, but just being paid doesn't make it work. Work is where we put out an effort to create products and services that glorify God and meet the needs and sometimes the wants of people, of our neighbors and people around us.
So what are some of the major challenges people face in today's world in being a workplace disciple?
Well, I think, externally speaking, of course, the rise of technology and robots and artificial intelligence, this is displacing some traditional work. People are losing jobs in manufacturing because robots are taking over, but that's also true in medicine and a lot of other fields as well. So certainly technology is a great challenge. Globalization means we're competing with workers from all over the world, and sometimes that creates disruptions. But of course, COVID is the latest thing, and this is a massive disruption where some people have lost their jobs, and most of the rest of us are working much more from home. So that's a huge challenge these days. But I would actually say, Hal, the biggest challenge of all is the fact that Christians haven't thought enough about this, and we don't really know what it means for Jesus to be Lord of our work. We're not seeing the lessons of Scripture. And, I often say Jesus had more to say about money, property, and wealth than he did about heaven and hell and a whole lot of other subjects that are very important, but still we tend to neglect and overlook, and we don't, and a lot of times our pastors aren't really prepared by their seminary or Bible school backgrounds to see those lessons, and often our pastors don't have any experience working out in workplaces outside of church turf.
Now you list 5 steps that believers need to prepare themselves in order to be most effective in the workplace. Name some of those steps.
Well, the first step is to make the commitment, because I think just like almost anything, getting fit, for example, it's not going to happen if we approach it randomly and say, well, I better get fit this year. No, we've got to actually make a commitment, share that with others who will hold us accountable and support us. So making the commitment, I think, is the first thing to say, I am going to commit myself to honoring Jesus Christ in my work. Secondly, it's learning how to connect our work with our prayer life. I talk about how we're really good at emergency prayers about our work. Lord, I'm about to get fired, or Lord, they're harassing me at work, or something like that. But we need to be more proactive in our prayer life, where we pray for guidance and strength before we go to work, and in a more holistic, anticipatory way, not just throwing up our crisis prayers to the Lord. The third step is to listen. So prayer is talking to God in a simple sense, but reading Scripture is listening to God. So I have a chapter about how to read our Bibles, looking for those workplace lessons. A fourth step is partnering. creating what I call a posse. It's not good for man to dwell alone. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. We need to have partners who are praying with us and supporting us. So I feel like individualism is a great enemy, really, that undermines our capacity to honor Christ in the workplace. We need people, prayer partners, people who understand our work, and we can share what's going on with them. And then the 5th step is what I call lifelong learning, where we as disciples of Christ, we want to get better at our jobs. So we want to study in order to be as good as we can be, deliver excellence at work. But it's also about wisdom. So much of the knowledge and information in the world today is bits and pieces of breaking news and opinions and things like this. We need a deeper kind of wisdom that comes out of Scripture, but also comes, I recommend reading more history of our profession, for example, history and stories of Christian leaders who we can learn from. So there's a whole agenda that I describe in my 5th step there of preparation to deepen our knowledge base and, above all, our wisdom base.
Now, you refer to workplace discipleship as very hard work. Why is that?
Well, any kind of discipleship is going to have challenges. In this world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome this world. And we know the most faithful disciples in history. Well, first of all, our Lord, he was perfect in his work. He did the work of his Father. You know, before Jesus went to the cross, he prayed in his prayer and said, "Father, I've glorified you by finishing the work that you gave me to do." And then he did the work on the cross. So there's always going to be a bearing of the cross. There will be some opposition. We live in a fallen, broken world. And so to say, I want to follow Jesus Christ, as you said at the very beginning, there may be some opposition from people that we work with or from our bosses, but there's also just exhaustion and complexity and all of these things. But what I always say is, you know, it may be hard, but it's much better to have Jesus walking with us through the valley of the shadow of death than to walk through it by ourselves. So even in the worst of circumstances, this is a great way to live, is to take our Lord and our faith to work with us.
And I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Absolutely.
Now, David, you say we need to focus on the character and mission of God. How would you define that?
I do. Well, because I think that what I talk about is alignment. The first challenge is to try to do our work in alignment with the work that God is already doing in the world. And so, and part of that is because we're challenged to walk in the ways of the Lord. I mean, in the Old Testament and New Testament, we're to follow after Jesus Christ. And so his agenda becomes our agenda. We're not God, but we do have the Spirit of God empowering us to do the work of the Lord. I also think from another perspective, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And we follow a working God as well as a resting God. And so God's work is the primary model for what we want to accomplish in the workplace. So what is that? If we want 2 words, God is the creator and the redeemer. So we want in our work, whether it's in manufacturing or raising our children or being an artist, whatever it is, we want to do what results in the creation and, you might say, the production of things that God could call good, things that are good for food, but also pleasing to the eye. So we want to study God's work as creator and then align our work as much as possible to bear witness to that creation. But God doesn't just create good things, he fixes bad things. That's where the Redeemer comes in. God is the healer of the hurting, not just the creator of initial life, but the healer of hurting life. And so we want to be creative. We want to be redemptive. But also there are other images, like God is the sustainer. So I'm saying wherever we are, wherever we work, we want to sustain the people around us, help hold them up when they're falling down. And also our business. We want to help sustain our business. We want to stand behind the products that we deliver, because God doesn't just create something and walk away. He sustains what he's made. And so we want to be creators and sustainers and redeemers. And I also, in my chapter, allude to the fact that God is also the source of wisdom. He is wisdom. And we want to be the kind of people who bring wisdom to the workplace. And God is righteousness. And so we want to be people like the prophets call for. We want to be people who stand up for justice and for fairness. If somebody's being mistreated, if our customers are getting something that's not what we promised, we want to be people who stand up for what's right and what's just. And then the sixth characteristic is God is the finisher, not just the Alpha, but the Omega. God finishes the work that he's begun in us and in the world. So we want to be the kind of people who follow through in our work and finish and bring excellence and glory to God. So that's what I mean by the character of God becomes our basic philosophy of what makes for good work. Faithful to the ways of God.
So if you put it in a baseball analogy, God's not only the starting pitcher, but he's the closer as well in the game of life here. So David, why do you believe that accountability is vital to us as believers?
Well, we're accountable to God, first of all. We'll give an answer for how we live our lives. We believe in that from day to day, but also from the eternal perspective. You know, we're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account. So I think that accountability is important, but we also need to be accountable to other people in our lives, you know, people who are men and women of God who can hold us accountable. And we need to invite that accountability. We don't just want a posse of people who will always just praise us for whatever we do. And we want people who love us enough to say, look, I think you shouldn't go in this direction, or we share a problem and they could say, you know, I wouldn't go this direction. And so it's on that level too, accountability to God, but also to others around us.
Now, there's a vast difference between available information at our fingertips and wisdom needed to really understand it. David, how can we really develop discernment when it comes to the two?
Well, you know, I think, first of all, the fear of the Lord's the beginning of wisdom. So that is going to be the basis. My father was a mid-level accounting executive all of his life, and he didn't go to seminary, or he actually didn't even go to college. But my dad read Proverbs every morning of his life. You know, there are 31 chapters. So every day my dad read a different chapter of Proverbs every day, all of his life. And I think, you know, that's where the wisdom comes from, you know, common sense, you might say, which is not so common. But so I think the wisdom comes there, but also it comes from from perspective. You know, wisdom is from perspective, not getting lost in the details, but seeing, not just seeing the trees, but seeing the forest. And so the Bible helps us develop this kind of wisdom. It's practical knowledge and discernment. And then, of course, I also think it's from our posse, because, you know, in Romans, I love this chapter 12, where Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then he immediately says, but don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but think soberly. You have one gift, but you don't have them all. So we need that community in order to figure out what is the will of God. What is that good and acceptable and perfect thing to do in my work? I need others. I can't think more highly of just my own self than I ought to.
David, what's a good biblical insight that almost anyone can share in a secular workplace? Think of one maybe right on the top of your head.
Well, servant leadership. I mean, this is something Jesus taught. You know, people in the world love to lord it over others, but I'm your Lord, and I don't do that. I'm among you as one who serves. And we're challenged to think not how to impose our leadership and lean on people like that, like a dictator or something, but instead we're here to serve people. So yes, we do need to assert leadership in the sense of holding people accountable who are working for us, or our kids as they're growing up. But we want to do it as servants. We're really here to serve God and actually to serve others as well. So that's one thing. I think this community thing is also taught from cover to cover in the Bible, that it's not good for one to dwell alone, man or woman to dwell alone. We need others. David and Jonathan made a covenant. Ruth and Naomi made a covenant to support each other. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. So I would always argue in any workplace where I am on behalf of a collaboration and teamwork, and not just doing things all by ourselves. So there is individual responsibility and capability, but we're much stronger if we always stress the importance of teams. And I would do that in my secular workplace, you could say. I wouldn't necessarily quote the Bible initially. I'd tell them later on, if people ask, well, why are you so strong on teams? I would probably say, well, it comes out of my faith. But I would promote that anywhere, on a faculty or anywhere.
David, we have about 30 seconds left in the interview here. Can you suggest quickly a way to handle workplace conflict?
Well, I love the Beatitudes as a model for our own character, which can be applied to handling conflict. So the point of the whole thing is really, I think, in number 7, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. We want people to have peace with God, but peace with each other as well. Now, how do we get there? I think the Beatitudes are a progression. So it begins in being poor in spirit. We'll never be able to help people overcome conflict if they won't be humble and say, we're messed up. We need to work at this. And then from being poor in spirit goes lamenting that poverty and brokenness. Blessed are those who mourn, being meek and gentle, not trying to be the control freak in the situation. And then pursuing what is just and righteous and true. We've got to do that, but we won't see that justice if we don't start out in openness and humility. If we just plunge in and search for justice immediately without that openness, I don't think we'll get there. But justice must be accompanied by mercy, the 5th beatitude, and purity of heart, integrity, if we want to get to number 7, which is to be a peacemaker. We never look more like the children of God than when we are peacemakers. Those who are peacemakers will be called the children of God. And then number 8 is, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this is the realism end of the Beatitude, saying even if you work this way and try to resolve conflicts, it's not always going to work. And sometimes people are going to attack you and accuse you of bad faith, but hang in there. Keep working on God's righteousness agenda.
Some solid insight and wisdom. David Gill, author of Workplace Discipleship 101. Thanks for joining me today from Oakland, California.
It's great to be with you, Hal. Thanks so much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.